Cool. Right. Yes, so I'm Chris, Head of Marketing at Strategic, based out in Suffolk. Full service marketing, although I'm an SEO at heart. Can't take it out of me, no matter how hard we try. I will endeavour to make this as relevant to the talk as possible, but not so relevant that I get distracted with bad TV from too long ago. So, how do we know the best way to manage Googlebot's crawl or indexing of your website? There are many methods, canonicals, 301s, rev, next, previous. We are spoilt for choice, but I think the two that are commonly misused ones of these are robots.txt and meta robots directives. Why? Well, to a casual observer, they are very similar ways of essentially doing the same thing. To block Google, restrict Google. But I don't think that that's a very helpful way of thinking about them. And in many circumstances, it will stop you getting the most out of your website. By thinking of them in this way, what we do is we lose a lot of the nuance in terms of how we're actually blocking Google and, in effect, what this actually does. So today, I'm going to run through a framework, one that I think will help change this way of thinking. But actually, more importantly, I want to help you make the right choices when employing these in the future. Okay, some key words of warning, really. A lot of the time, this can be advanced stuff. One wrong foot will cause you some serious damage. And like all things code-based, I guess, a small issue or a small incorrectness in your code, you'll annoy someone quite significantly. Now, these methods are, I'd say, only a part of your toolkit as an SEO or as a digital marketer. And actually, I would argue that they're not always the first choice. In many cases that I'm going to talk about, the whole reason that you're resorting to these methods is because something else has gone wrong or something's not ideal. So don't rush out to robots.txt, to meta robots, if there is actually a way that you can fix the problem first in code. And like all things, when you get into tech SEO, there are many ifs and buts. So what I'm about to run through and talk about is kind of a guide. What will work on one site won't work on another. There are many, many variables. So use this as a framework, as a way of structuring your thinking. But ultimately, do your due diligence first and make sure you're not going to screw something up. But if we can finish today with slightly more understanding, that level of certainty on that has changed throughout me writing this. I've gone for slightly more. That's an increment is good for this. More importantly, if we can change your approach, I think we're onto a winner. So, time to introduce the robots. So the first one, robots.txt, is probably the easiest one to understand. It's a text file, sits at the root of your website, and kind of politely tells different bots how to crawl your website, if they'll heed it. Meta robots, it sits within the head of your code. Amongst other things, again, it can request that bots not index pages or not follow links on them. They're the functions we're most useful. And X robots, which in kind of a lazy way of thinking, but it's very similar to meta robots, except this takes place at a HTTP response level, and is very useful for a number of reasons. So I'd say that these are possibly the most important of some of your SEO tools because of the power of what they can do. But again, like all things, the more power you have in it, the more damage you could cause if you do it wrong. But the most important question, what do you snog, marry, or avoid? Don't know if anyone actually remembers this, or whether you've tried to forget. I'm actually the latter on that one. I don't want anyone to mistake the fact that I've picked this as a talk title because I actually like it. But what does a slightly shit BBC Three show have to do with SEO? You should be thinking this. To a degree, I am. But one site's snog is another's marry, or maybe avoid. What am I saying by this? That a choice that's right for one won't be right for another, and why you may make certain decisions will vary. So, there is no one-size-fits-all option here. Now, there are lots of thoughts on how we employ these as methods and why we do them. I'd argue that many are wrong, although I've got to be careful making that kind of assertion because, again, there's no sort of truths in this necessarily. They're just varying degrees of good or bad, short of de-indexing your entire website, which will suck for anyone. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you a way of simplifying things and ultimately help you pick the right tool for the job. And that all starts with, one key point is knowing the problem you're trying to fix. And actually what technical SEO issue isn't, you don't start at this point. It's because it's the most critical. If you know what you're trying to fix, why you're trying to fix it, selecting the right method is ultimately easier. First question, do you have a crawl problem? Is Google not seeing enough of your site regularly enough? Is it not being able to complete satisfactorily the crawl regularly enough? Or, conversely, is it an index problem? Is Google seeing too much of the bad stuff? There are lots of thin content pages, lots of duplication, basically index bloats, making the site look too large. Now, broadly speaking, we fix crawl problems with robot text file. Ultimately, when you're saying disallow to Google, you're saying do not crawl this page. In a similar way like that, that's how you'd stop a mad spider trap. And we fix indexing problems with meta robots, primarily using no index as a definition, which will look something like that. Now, obviously, that's maybe at the risk of oversimplifying this whole issue. You kind of miss one of the key points is how do you identify these problems? Well, I'd say that index problems are fairly simple to spot, and it can be done in so many different ways. You can start in Search Console, look at how many pages are indexed. You've got to have a good idea roughly how big your site is. Is that number bigger than the actual number? Look in, HTML improvements or other areas. See, is there any obvious areas of duplication? Because that's content within the index that is not right for one reason or other, whether there's too much of it or too little. And then use other tools. My personal favourites, Siteliner or Screaming Frog, will help you point out areas of thin content, of duplication, and other issues. Fundamentally, does it look too big in Google's eyes? But I'd say IDing a crawl problem can actually be a bit trickier. It's kind of an area that SEOs, or a lot of SEOs, are only really starting to get into, but it is quite a fundamental problem that has been at the heart of what we do for a while now. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this site if you use Screaming Frog, and it's this percentage that doesn't really ever move. You basically let it run and run and run until your computer locks up. That's probably a crawl problem. Fundamentally, in this approach, that is a symptom of a spider trap, amongst other things. I'm not really going to go into that in a lot more depth here. Portland's blog does a very good job at helping you identify it. But effectively, it's just where within your website are Google and other bots just getting tied up, where are they getting caught, and ultimately, where is your crawl budget being wasted? Now, the cost of this on your site, Google only has finite resources, albeit bigger than most, but it's not going to sort of waste all of its time. You'll have a budget of how much of your site it wants to crawl, it'll get that far, and then it'll come back and it'll start again another day. And again, just to sort of extend that a little bit of a word on it, it is definitely a thing, it has been confirmed. I know a lot of people have talked about it for a while, but some have sort of said, does it really exist? Is it really something that we need to worry about? Go to that link there. You can read the sort of fuller story on it, but essentially, yes, it is a thing, worry about it. But like most things, Google doesn't really give us a lot to go on here. It doesn't publicize the crawl budget, what it is, how that impacts the website, and ultimately, it's different for every site for various reasons, response times, authority, level of quality of content, how it's built, etc. Now, for this exercise, identifying whether you have a crawl budget issue or not, I think Yoast's approach is quite helpful to get an approximation of this, so you can work out your own crawl budget. And I'll run through that. So, go in Search Console. On average, how many pages is being crawled a day? So that is an average. Incidentally, if this changes dramatically, your 90-day average isn't going to be very accurate, so just use your common sense on that. Then take a look at how many pages are being indexed. I know that's not a perfect number, incidentally, but we'll run with it. Really simple sum equation. Take the number of pages, divide it by the average crawl per day, you'll get an approximation of your crawl score. So to take this example further, so number of pages, crawl per day, 6.7. So that's 6.7 times more pages that your site has than what is being crawled daily. Now, what does this mean? It doesn't mean that it's going to take sort of 7 days for your site to be crawled, that Google will start at one point one day, it will stop, and then it will carry on from that point until it reaches the bottom and then starts again. It's not linear like that. Google will always start from the top and work its way down, but it will visit some pages more frequently because of authority or other linking signals. But if we look at like a score like 10, basically, really simply, it's 10 times bigger, I'd consider that a fairly big crawl problem because it's taking a long time for Google to get down into the heart of your website. When you talk about scale and SEO, how big is big? I think it's very easy to think of this in the wrong way, but size is relative in this industry, and it's often linked, or the size of a problem will be linked to your level of authority or lack of authority. A small website, and a website with low authority but has a big crawl problem, that's going to be far more amplified because it's going to take Google a lot longer to get through and make the change it needs to. Broadly speaking, though, as a guide, under 1,000 pages is less of a problem. If you're looking to fix this, you're probably in the wrong area. Can you fix some content instead? Can you go and build some better links? I'd say. We start kind of getting up between 1,000 and 10,000. It kind of can be a moderate problem. It's something that is still fairly important. But anything larger than 10,000 pages, things start getting fun. And it's not too difficult to find websites where 250,000, 1 million, 2 million pages over what it should be because of problems like this. Complicating things slightly more though. Crawl problems and index problems aren't mutually exclusive. You can get one and the other. So index bloat at scale will hurt crawl because by very nature you're getting Google crawling pages that you don't, have no value. You don't want these pages crawled. It's wasting its time. But crawl issues can stop or slow the repair of index issues. If you do make changes to parts of your website, but it's still getting tied up in that same spider trap, it's going to take a while to get there and for you to see the benefit of your actions. So, kind of position this here, kind of giving you some kind of rationale. It'd be a bit remiss of me to not provide a few examples. Now, again, these are top level. I could have gone really deep in some case studies, and that could have taken the whole presentation up. But just to give you an idea of how we sort of apply this thought process or how we'd look at it. My favourite, and by favourite I mean the one that keeps me up at night, e-commerce filters which are getting indexed. That's a bad problem. You've quite often got potentially millions of versions of pages that Google's getting tied up in, and worse, it's starting to commit these to the index. These, you'll recognise them. Very useful from a UX experience, don't get me wrong, but quite often not implemented very well. How we'd look at this? Well, broadly speaking, if it's an index problem, as I said before, no index is a good way to start. This will kind of alleviate what I think is the worst part of the problem the quickest. And in this example, you would take the filtered part of the URL and make sure that any pages that have those conditions on are blocked. This is complicated if you've got horrible URL structures and other elements, but I'm going to assume that the developers have been at least a little bit kind to make that easy to implement. This is quite often how I do see it done. In this instance, I'd really say not, because disallowing these pages will potentially eventually stop the indexing issue, but it's not addressing it quickly. You're basically telling Google to stop crawling them, at least not until the index issue is cleared up, unless. How many people have used no index tags in robots text files? Yeah, a handful of you, not many. Google's not cool with this. Now, that's not really news because I could list the amount of things Google's not cool with that we all do daily, but time and time again, they say it's not supported, have a good backup, don't do it, do something different. Now, whether you want to listen to that or not is entirely your prerogative, but there are examples of it working that have happened in the past and still do work. So this is kind of a have your cake and eat it scenario. You can tell Google to no index the page, and then tell it to stop it crawling it, which works nicely. Now, exactly how small this issue is, or how small this implementation is, we've kind of crawled the majestic million, and about 3%-ish of those sites with valid robot text files use it. So if you are using it, you are in the very tiny minority. But applying this or any rules in robots, don't be too aggressive. you've got to be aware that some pages, some filters are worth having. Have they gotten links? Do they currently rank? Do they drive traffic and sales? You ultimately need to make yourself aware of that before you start blocking anything off, otherwise you are going to lose traffic and you are going to lose revenue. Cool. So moving on, blog taxonomy is different size of an issue, generally speaking. Very different websites suffer from this. Tag clouds, lots of different categories. That brings me out in hives. I hate them, and I can't abide them. A way of fixing this pretty easily, get the blog categories and block them. No index. Keep the follow in there. Let the PR flow through them if you need to, but just get them out of the index. You don't want them there. You don't need them there. There's a good chance that this could cause cannibalization problems, duplication problems. It's just not worth your time. So if we go back to e-commerce now, similar scenario to the one before, except that none of these filters are actually getting indexed. You've blocked them. You've been proactive from launch, but you're still seeing significant crawl problems from it. Well, that's fairly straightforward in that instance. We fix crawl problems with robots text files. Just disallow whatever the filter URLs are. But incidentally, if you want to use meta robots just to make sure those URLs still aren't getting indexed, you can still do that. Other miscellaneous pages, terms and conditions, privacy policies, anything like that, just no index them, really straightforward. And anything else, by which I mean other files like images, PDFs, etc. Well, actually, that's where Xrobots can really come into its own. So, any page that's not HTML, where you can't drop a meta robots tag in there, you can implement an Xrobots tag, which looks similar to this. Now, for most who aren't used to sort of making edits to htaccess files or similar, this is going to feel a little bit alien. And incidentally, if you're ever playing with an htaccess file, you can really screw up your website. Don't do it live. But this is a very powerful way of very quickly restricting the indexing and crawl of certain pages. So, my original premise then, to return to it, because I've got to, robots text file is what I'd say is my marry. It's my steady, I guess. It's the one that I most often come back to because ultimately it'll fix the problem. Robots text file, though, is my Snog, I guess. That was incredibly difficult to find an image like that I could actually put up. There's some weird stuff out there. But the key point is it has its uses. I've met a lot of people that won't go near robots text file and in terms of blocking because of various reasons, but it can really make a difference. This example here is one of, we identified using log files that there were thousands of URLs crawled a day. Not indexed, not an indexing issue, but was tying up Google's crawl budget. Blocked it there. We did some other stuff, but this was the main action that we did at the start of the campaign, and we did see some strong growth of the average keyword positions and traffic off the back of that, which is great. But it is very easy to screw it up. Whenever you make changes like this to robots text file, just make sure, just test it. Use the tool in Search Console, validate what you're doing, make sure that the URLs that you do still want to be crawled are still crawlable. But what about Xrobots? For when meta robots isn't possible, so if your CMS doesn't allow it or you can't implement it, it's a bit of a generous assumption that you can actually then still make the appropriate changes that you need to. But for those CMSs that you can't implement it on, sometimes an Xrobots tag is a really good way of applying these rules over quite a large scale. It's not my avoid, though. Can't think of a good reason to avoid it, in fairness. But if not that, then what is? Maybe you could say I'm copying out a bit here, but the lazy option, don't do it. Avoid it like the plague. Pointless disallow rules instead of fixing the problem, which I see all too often. It's a very convenient solution, and it can work, but you're not really treating the cause of the issue. You're just putting a Band-Aid over it. If you've got lots of filtered filtered pages that are being crawled and indexed, okay, you block it with no index, but it's still going to get crawled, which is still going to cripple you if you're a large website. And this is my personal favourite. We should write better content, but don't want to. So blocking it using robots text. Just don't do it. Write the content. Actually make use of the rankings rather than hide the stuff that you don't want Google to see. Make it an asset. But when we talk about the best choice, and when I kind of give people a hard time for blocking things that they shouldn't be, it very much depends on what your limitations are. Because actually, we don't operate in a perfect world. We don't have carte blanche over all of our websites. Do you have the access that you need? Or enough buy-in? And otherwise, some workarounds are better than doing nothing at all. So we've already had this at one of the panels here today, meta robots via Tag Manager, or using robots text files when there's no option. So, key takeaways. Is it a crawl or an index problem? Check what you can change. More importantly, check what you can't change and make the best case fix. Implement, crawl, and check again, and then check again. And I've actually prepared a little flowchart that you can download that will help you out. Cool. Thank you.